Okay, so in the next part of your notes, you got a table there in the middle of the page where I want to give you some other names that we use to describe the domain and the range. So remember, your domain and your range are your two main terms when you talk about a function. Okay, so I already used two words already in your notes right above to describe the domain and range, and those were input and output. So if you can recall, I said that the domain would be your input values, and your domain will be your output values. Okay? So, other words that you can use that pretty much are saying the same thing. They're both, it's domain or range. Another set of words that I've already used, I believe, already in the notes, are independent and dependent variables. Well, if your domain or your input is kind of where you start, like that's your numbers that either I give you or, numbers that you already have, like it would be the price of my gasoline or your hourly wage at the commissary. They're already set. That would be your independent variables. So that's what you're starting with. So that's going to be your domain. That's going to be your independent variables, or probably, you guys got to know, sometimes I change things up. So make sure you've got a pencil. You shouldn't be doing notes with the pen. Independent values or independent numbers will also be your domain. Now, your independent values, like I said, that's what you're starting with. Those are the set numbers, fix the values that you can't mess with. Something's going to happen, like how many gallons of gas I put in my car, or how many hours you work, that you're going to, relate to what you're starting with to get the range. So your range depends on your starting point, your independent value. So your range will be your dependent values. This is what you get. This is your output. This is your answer. So this would have been the price that I paid for my gas this morning when I went up to the register. This is the amount of money that you got in your paycheck at the commissary. This is what you end up with. Okay? So independent, dependent, again, two words that you got to be familiar with, but it all goes back to they're basically the domain and the range of your function. And the most basic pair, I think you have one more row there in your table. The most basic way to describe the domain and range is simply your x values and your y values. Now, x values, y values, it depends on if it's a graph or a table or an equation. You should be able to identify one or the other. This is something that you learned probably like in the 6th or 7th grade. So x values and y values, whatever the x values are, those numbers will always be your domain. Whatever your y values are, those numbers will always be your range. Okay? Now, there's one thing that you need to remember, and this is not written in your notes. It's something I want you to add. This is major, 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 because in the next few minutes, we're going to talk about how do you know if what you have is a function. How do you know the table of data that you have is a function? So I'm going to give you the rule, and we're going to write it down. You just find some space right there under your table. This is very, very important if you want to be able to answer the next couple of questions correctly. All right? So write this down. For a relation, can you see that? I don't know. For a relationship to be a function. Because remember, I told you, we're dealing with numbers. So for the most part, we'll get some word problems in later, but for right now, we're dealing with numbers. So if I just give you a set of numbers, you got to know, is this a function or not? So for a relationship or these set of numbers to be a function, you can have only one y value, or you can call it a dependent value or an output, or your range can be matched to an x value. Okay? Only one y value can be matched to an x value, or your independent number, or your input, or your domain. So in a second, we're going to look at some tables. Make sure you write this down, and I'm going to explain to you exactly what this means, because I'm going to ask you, are these numbers functions? All these numbers that I'm giving you, do they make a function based on our definition? So make sure you write this down. I'm going to put it in a bubble, and you need to underline it or highlight it or something, because this is going to be the key